Hello guys, this is the third part of the brain chapter, and in this part I want to talk about the diencephalon and the brainstem. The diencephalon is sandwiched between the inferior region of the cerebral hemisphere, and because of that we call it in-between brain. The diencephalon composed of epithalamus, thalamus, and hypothalamus. The epithalamus, as you see it here, can make the posterior part of the roof of the diencephalon, and it's covered by it covers the third ventricle. We have two structures here. One of them is called pineal gland or pineal body. This is the endocrine gland which can secrete melatonin, and it can help regulation of nighttime and daytime cycle, which we call it circadian rhythm. And some companies are marketing the sale of melatonin in pills, and it's the cure for jet lag and insomnia, although this is not actually the treatment. And the other part is called subennular nuclei, which rely signal limbic system. I will talk about limbic system a little later, to the midbrain, and it involves in visceral and emotional responses to different odors. The next part of the diencephalon is called the thalamus. The thalamus is the oval masses of gray matter on the lateral side of the third ventricle. Look at here, this is these two oval masses which we can see the lateral side of the third ventricle, and we have the structure which we call it interthalamic adhesion or interthalamic mass, which can connect the two thalamus together. The thalamus has very important function, and it can receive signal from all conscious senses except the sense of olfaction. The thalamus is the principal and final relay point for incoming sensory information that is processed and then projected to the appropriate lobe of the cerebral cortex. Only a relatively small portion of the sensory information that arrives at the thalamus is forwarded to the cerebrum, because the thalamus acts as the information filter. For example, the thalamus is responsible for filtering out the sounds and signals in a crowded cafeteria where you are trying to study. The thalamus also clues in the cerebrum about where the sensory information came from. For example, the thalamus let the cerebrum know that the sensory information it receives came from the eye, indicating that the information is visual. So it's very important to know about the thalamus. And the last region and the most important region which we have in our diencephal is called hypothalamus. In this picture, you can see the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the anterior inferior region of the thalamus. Suspended to the hypothalamus, we have pituitary gland, and you can see the infundibulum, which can connect the pituitary gland and hypothalamus together. We have different functions for hypothalamus. One of them is the control of autonomic nervous system. The hypothalamus can influence the heart rate, blood pressure, digestive activities, and respiration. It can control the endocrine system. It can secrete hormones that control activity in the anterior pituitary gland. From the hypothalamus, we have some releasing hormone which can affect the secretion of our pituitary gland. For example, from the hypothalamus, we have secretion of thyroid stimulating hormone, thyroid releasing hormone. From this region, we have secretion of gonadotropin releasing hormone. And this gonadotropin releasing hormone or a thyroid releasing hormone can affect our thyroid stimulating hormone in the pituitary gland, and then from the pituitary gland we have the secretion of the hormones. Also in the hypothalamus we have secretion of antidiuretic hormone or ADH and oxytocin, and you will learn about these hormones later in ANP2. The hypothalamus can regulate the body temperature. The neurons in the perioptic area detect altered temperature and signals other hypothalamic nuclei to heat or cool the body. So the thermoregulatory center is located in our hypothalamus. The other function which we have is food intake. Ventromedial nucleus monitor nutrient level and regulate your hunger. Water intake, anterior nucleus monitor concentration of dissolved substances in the blood, and it can regulate your thirst. A sleep-wake rhythm. The suprachiasmatic nucleus directs pineal gland to secrete melatonin, which can regulate the circadian rhythm. Emotional behavior, and this is a part of our limbic system. We can control our pleasure, our fear, and the other emotional responses. And in this picture, you can see the hypothalamus and different groups of cells, neurons in the hypothalamus, and each of them can control a specific function of the body. After the diencephal, I want to talk about the brainstem. The brainstem can connect cerebrum, diencephalon, and cerebellum to the spinal cord. Look at this picture. In this picture, you can see the brainstem, and the brainstem is actually the bridge, a connection between the higher and the lower part of our central nervous system. It contains ascending and descending tract. Ascending tract are the tract which bring the information up, and descending tract are the tract which can take the command down, and we can see both of them in the brainstem. It contains autonomic nuclei, nuclei for cranial nerves, and also some reflex centers are located in this region. The brainstem is divided into three parts: the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. These are the three parts of the brain stem. In the brainstem, also we have some several peduncle. Let me show you the picture. The cerebral peduncle are motor tract or the pyramidal system on the anterior lateral surface of the midbrain, and they can carry voluntary motor command from the primary motor cortex down in the spinal cord. Look at this picture. In this picture, you can see these cerebral peduncle. Also, in this part, we have a region which we call it substantia nigra. The substantia nigra consists of bilaterally symmetric nuclei within the midbrain. You can see substantia nigra in the midbrain in this region, but I don't know if I have the picture here. Unfortunately, I don't have the picture of substantia nigra here. Its name derived from the almost black appearance of this structure, and it can houses different neurons which can produce and secrete dopamine, and dopamine is involved in your movement, emotion, pleasure, and pain response. and the substantia nigra is the region of our brainstem which degenerate and it can cause Parkinson's disease. The other parts of the midbrain is called medial lamnicus, and it's the band of ascending myelinated axon running through the midbrain. And also we have superior cerebellar peduncle, which can connect the cerebellum to the midbrain. Here, the middle cerebellar peduncle. The other part which we have in the midbrain is called tectum, or corpora quadrigemina. In corpora quadrigemina, we have two parts. One part is called superior caliculi, and one part is called inferior caliculi. Actually, there are four lumps. Two of them are located superior, and two of them are located inferior. The superior caliculi control visual reflex and tracing them, and the inferior caliculi can control auditory reflexes. So these are the different parts which you can see in your midbrain. The next part is called pons, and here you can see the pons. Pons actually means the bridge, and this is the bulging part of the brainstem, and it's located in the anterior part of the brainstem. Consists of sensory and motor tract connecting the brain and the spinal cord. And also in the pons, we have pontine respiratory center, which can control the skeletal muscle, which works for our breathing, and it can control the rhythm of our breathing too. In this picture, you can see the pons, and you can see the nuclei which are located in the pons. And here is the cross section of the pons. Look at this cross section. In this cross section, you can see that the gray matter wants to come gradually inside and the white matter goes outside. And this is the structure and the organization which we have in our spinal cord. Gradually, the location of gray matter and white matter should change in the brainstem. And when we reach the spinal cord, the gray matter is located inside and the white matter is located outside. And the next part of the brainstem is called medulla oblongata. And the medulla oblongata is the inferior portion of the brainstem, and it continues with the spinal cord inferiorly. It includes the sensory and motor tracts which connect the brain and the spinal cord. We can see pyramids. Two pyramids here. They are pairs of ridges in the anterior surface. And when these pyramids, which contain ascending and descending tract, want to go up, they cross over each other. And this crossing is made the X structure, which we call it decussation of the pyramids. And this crossing over can control the voluntary movement of the opposite side of the body. In the medulla oblongata, we have some nuclei, the cardiac center, which can control the heart output, the cardiac output, the number of heartbeat is controlled here. We have medullary respiratory center, which can control the breathing rate, control dorsal. In this part, we have dorsal and ventral respiratory group, which we call them DRG and VRG, and they are important for inhalation and exhalation. And this part can communicate with the pontine respiratory center, which is located in the pons. Also in medulla oblongata, we have some centers for coughing, sneezing, vomiting, salivation, and also swallowing. So all of these centers are located in the medulla oblongata. The next structure which you need to know in the brain is called cerebellum. The cerebellum is composed of uh, right and left hemisphere, and this is the second largest part of the brain. It coordinates fine control over skeletal muscle action and store memories of movement pattern, such as when you're playing piano. This memory is stored in your cerebellum. The cerebellar cortex, look at here, has many folds. These folds are more organized in the cerebellum when we compare it with cerebrum, and these folds are called folia. Between the right and left hemisphere of the cerebellum, we have a region which we call it vermis. This is the narrow band of nervous tissue lies along the midbrain between the left and right cerebellar lobe. The cerebellum has two regions. One region is gray, it's located outside, and one region is white, which is located inside. The gray matter is called cerebellar cortex, and in the cerebellar cortex, we have the nerve cell bodies, like the cortex of our cerebrum. And the internal region of the white matter is called arbor vitae, because the structure is very similar to the pattern and the branches of a tree. And you can see the arbor vitae here. About the function of the cerebellum, you need to know that the cerebellum doesn't initiate a skeletal muscle movement. Rather, it coordinates and fine-tunes a skeletal muscle movement. Um, and the movement of the muscle is initiated in our cerebrum. The skeletal muscle contraction should follow the correct pattern, and it can control in the cerebellum. And the cerebellum can lead to a smooth, coordinated movement of muscle. The cerebellum stores memories of previously learned movement pattern. This function is performed indirectly by regulating activities along both voluntary and involuntary motor pathway, which we have it in the cerebellar cortex, cerebellar nuclei, and motor center, which we have in the brain stem. The cerebrum initiates a movement and send the rough draft to the movement for the movement to the cerebellum, which then coordinate and adjust. For example, the controlled, precise movement of classical guitarist makes when playing a concerto result from fine-tuning by the cerebellum. Without the cerebellum, the guitarist's movement would be choppy and sloppy, without precise coordination between the two hands. The cerebellum has several additional functions, and you can see them here. Ensure muscle activity follows correct pattern, store memories of previously learned movement, regulate activity along voluntary and involuntary motor paths, adjust movement initiated by cerebrum, ensuring a smoothness, and help maintain equilibrium and posture. It can receive some proprioceptive information from muscle and joints, and continuously receive motor plans and sensory feedback. And it may generate error correcting signals to be sent to the premotor and primary motor cortex. So these are important to know about the cerebellum. For example, you are able to balance on one foot because the cerebellum takes the proprioceptive information from your joints and map out a muscle tone plan to keep the body upright. The proprioceptive information from the body's muscle and joint is sent to the cerebellum and then to the cerebrum. Thus, the cerebrum is made aware of your position of each body joint and its muscle tone, even if the person is not looking at the joint. For example, if you close your eye, you're still aware of which body joints are flexed and which of them is extended. If you look at this picture, you can see some cerebellar pathway. Look at here. The cerebellar pathway are input to the cerebellum from the motor cortex of the cerebrum and the pons. And the sensory input relied from proprioceptors to the cerebellum. Within the cerebellum, the integration and analysis of input information occur, and a corrective feedback output is made here, and it goes to the cerebrum. Look at here. The red line, the red arrows, shows you voluntary movement. The primary motor cortex and the basal nuclei in the forebrain send impulses through the nuclei of the pons, as you see here, to your cerebellum. Then the blue color shows you assessment of voluntary movement. The proprioceptors in the skeletal muscle and joints report their movement and their degree of flexion and extension to your cerebellum. The green part shows you the integration take place. The cerebellar compares the planned movement which come from your cerebrum and the information from proprioceptors, and integration take place here. And then we have some corrective feedback which starts from the cerebellum and go to the motor cortex which we have in our cerebrum. So you see that they should work together to have a very good posture and a very good movement. You can see the effect of alcohol in the cerebellar function. A variety of drugs and alcohol in particular can temporarily or permanently impair cerebellar function. Alcohol intoxication leads to the following symptom of impaired cerebellar function, which are used in the classic sobriety test performed by the police officer. One of them is disturbance of gait, loss of balance and posture, and inability to detect proprioceptive information. And the last part of this chapter is about the limbic system. The brain has two important functional systems that work together for a common purpose. These are considered functional brain systems because their structure are not confined to one major region of the brain, but are located throughout two or more regions of the brain. These systems are the limbic system and the reticular formation. The limbic system is composed of multiple cerebral and diencephalic structures that collectively process and experience our emotion. The limbic system has different parts. The limbic system is sometimes referred to the emotional brain. The structure of limbic system form a ring or border around the diencephalon. Look at here. You can see that we can make a ring around the diencephalon, although neuroanatomists continue to debate the component of limbic system, but we can have some classification of this system. And you can see them here. One of them is called cingulate gyrus. In the sagittal plane, it's located above the corpus callosum. I will show it to you. It receives input from the other component of the limbic system. The other one is called parahippocampal gyrus. It's cortical tissue in the temporal lobe. We have hippocampus, which is superior to parahippocampal gyrus, and it helps form long-term memories. We have amyloidal bodies involved in many aspects of emotion, emotional memory, specifically in the fear. Olfactory bulb, tract, and cortex, it can process odor that can provoke emotion. And fornix is the thin white tract connecting hippocampus and the other part of the limbic system. And we have the other part which can interconnect the other parts of our limbic system, like the habenular nuclei, mammillary body, septal nuclei, and anterior thalamic nuclei. In this picture, you can see the limbic system. You can see this ring. You can see it's located above the corpus callosum, and the main region is called cingulate gyrus. You can see the fornix here. This region is called parahippocampal gyrus, and you can see hippocampus here. These are the different parts of our limbic system. And I told you that besides the limbic system, we have the other structure, which we call it reticular formation. Projecting vertically through the core of the midbrain, as you see in this picture, midbrain, pons, and medulla is a loosely organized of gray matter, which we call it a reticular formation. The reticular formation extends slightly into the diencephalon, as you see here, and the spinal cord. A functional brain system has both motor and sensory components. The motor component of the reticular formation communicates with the spinal cord and is responsible for regulating muscle tone. And this motor component also assists in autonomic motor function like respiration, blood pressure, heart rate, by working with autonomic center, which we have in the medulla and in the pons. And the sensory component of the reticular formation is responsible for altering the cerebrum to incoming sensory information. And consciousness includes an awareness of sensation, voluntary control of motor activity, and the activities necessary for higher mental processing. It involves the stimulation activity of large areas of the cerebral cortex. The level of consciousness exists on the continuum. The highest state of consciousness and cortical activity is called alertness, in which the individual is responsive, aware of self, and well-oriented to person, place, and time. And all of them happen in this reticular formation and limbic system together. Here you can see that we have some sensory information which come up from different senses, and we have some motor command which go down here, and you can see that some inputs from this reticular formation can go to the cerebrum. We're done with the brain chapter, and I hope you learned something about this brain.